Hello there, and welcome to the Thank You Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb. Today I'm joined by my father, Dr. Scott Keith, by Bruce Hillman and Adam Francisco.
Have you noticed, Adam, how he's dropped the doctor from your introduction?
It just sounded... I was listening to episodes of editing, and it sounds pretentious.
You don't have to say it for me. I really don't care.
Yeah, I don't know.
Nor do I.
Okay. I am here with a bunch of normal...
You could call me Disco
fellas.
Francisco if you want.
Yeah. Just a bunch of regular guys. Scott Keith, Adam Francisco, and Bruce Hillman. And we are doing a scary episode. But before we do our terrifying topic, the Thinking Fellows is part of the 1517 podcast network of shows. If you haven't checked out some of the other shows on 1517's podcast network, you should go to 1517.org/podcasts. There you'll see 18 other active shows that you can listen to, subscribe to throughout the week. Those shows vary a lot. There's some shows that do systematic and historical theology, sort of like the Thank You Fellows, but we also have full-blown exegetical shows that do nothing but the Old and New Testament, some seasonal stuff that's gone through the Psalms.
We have a show that someday is going to make it as a podcast.
Yeah, talk to your partner in crime.
Really good show called Tough Text with Scott Keith and Daniel Emery Price. Maybe I should elicit listeners to give you like 30 emails, 40 emails to motivate you.
I won't explain the hang-ups on the air, but let's just say it coming soon to a podcast player near you. Yeah, and we have a whole lot more. One of the other things going on at 1517 is our YouTube channel, and you should definitely go subscribe to that. On YouTube, we put up conference video, which I think a lot of people are going to want access to this year because our conferences sold out rather quickly compared to years past. And so if you missed out on that, the video from those talks will be up, and you can see video from past conferences up there as well. So go ahead and check that out. Okay, so today, the terrifying topic is one that Adam's been asking about for a couple weeks. I think, Adam, you gave a bit of a lecture on this topic as well. And that is woke. What is woke? And one of the reasons I think this is scary is not just the possibility of getting canceled, but also the possibility of hopping on a train that lots of people are trying to use, whether left or right. And so I think I let Adam outline sort of maybe a multi-episode approach to this, with the first topic being what is, very definitional, because I think that's one of the big problems with it, is anything that becomes a trope or just a catchy phrase politically, the definition changes to whatever you need it to be in the moment. So I'll let Adam go ahead and open us with, what is woke?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Because as you said, it's used so often now, such that it almost doesn't have a definition. Even though it does have a history. It doesn't, obviously there's the past tense verb, to wake up, right? But nobody uses it in that sense. I think the first time the word was used in a way that's connected to the way we use it today was in the late 1930s. So it's been around for about 100 years. I guess he's like a blues folk type singer named Lead Belly, who sang a song about a little more than half a dozen kids, young African-American kids, who were accused of rape on a train in Scottsboro, Alabama. And I don't know, it's hard to know exactly, at least all the stuff I've read, whether they or not they were guilty. But I do know it looked like some of them were falsely accused. Anyway, Lead Belly sang a song about the Scottsboro boys, He was interviewed about that song in 1938. Somebody asked him, like, well, what words would you have for your audience? And he says, well, if you're down in the racist South, you better watch your back. It's best to stay woke. And that's sort of the meaning of that was the meaning of the term woke in what's called African American vernacular English. For decades, be aware of your surroundings, especially in regions, the racist South. Even decades and decades after the Civil War, the South was entrenched in there was a racist culture down there. Not everybody, obviously, and certainly not every place, but I don't know that.
Think you fellas has now been canceled by the South? We're over.
Well, I mean that's just Scott's your dad's the American historian here, so
there's a tradition of this up until there's events during and right after World War I, with even African American soldiers who served, often signed up to serve in World War I. Because the big thing there was to protect democracy across the world, hoping that if they were to go protect democracy in Europe, that they'd come back and they'd get more of the benefits of the American democracy than they had when they left. And yet when they come back, and even before they leave, as they sign up and are at training camps where instances of violence are propagated against them. And I
think of the famous case would be... who's that young man who was accused of, I think, coming on to a woman?
Yeah.
It sparked the civil rights movement. Now I can't remember his name.
So, and this extends, through
brutally beaten.
Through, and I'm sure even after the civil rights movement of the 60s.
Yeah, so, you just can't get around it. Even though there's the Equal Protection Clause, in the what was that, 1870s, I think, there still is not equal protection in the South for decades to come. And I say that as a person who thinks the word racist or the accusation of racist is used so often that it's almost meaningless now. Mm-hmm. You just can't get around it. So anyway, that was Lead Belly. There's another figure in American history named Marcus Garvey, who's kind of a contemporary of Lead Belly. He's the father of at least in the Americas, black nationalism, who would oftentimes call African Americans or blacks. I'm not sure what the right word is now, but he would oftentimes encourage them to wake up as he tried to encourage this black nationalist movement, which had a number of components to it. Sometimes it's just called Garveyism, but essentially it said that African Americans or blacks who are in the Western Hemisphere have a common heritage, and therefore, and other things in common. Therefore, they constitute a distinct nation. And when it came to North America, the United States, they should resist assimilation because they were distinct from white America, right? So I don't know that there's record of him using the term woke, but he's always calling people to wake up, right? Anyway, the term persists in African American vernacular English through the decades into the late 20th century. In the 21st century, it starts to get used again in terms of the times it's used. Those people who at the Oxford English Dictionary and so on who track this say it starts to rise up or increase quite dramatically in the second decade of the 21st century. You find it in pop music, which we all listen to here, I'm sure.
Caleb does.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then after George Floyd was killed or died, it became a common hashtag in Twitter, and I assume Instagram uses hashtags, maybe Facebook, I have no idea.
Just doubling down on our hipness.
Yeah. More often than not, though, is "stay woke" was the hashtag. Then an interesting thing happened. I want to say it's like 2016, 2017. All of a sudden, the word got appropriated by the what some would call the new left, by white liberals. And it didn't just refer to, it wasn't just used for like racial sort of awareness or being aware of your surroundings if you happen to be a minority, in particular up until 2016 black. All of a sudden became a cliche or a trope, as you referred to it, Caleb, to kind of signal, maybe even virtue signal, that you are identify on the left. Let's just say far left, or we could call it the new left. That arises or emerges in the 1960s and has been gaining momentum ever since. The word was it was so widely used in 2016 that it made the finalist list for the word of the year. It lost to post-truth, but it was right alongside words like adulting and Latinx and those sorts of words.
Hated the word
2017, it's 2017. It's added to the dictionary. So it's been around for what? I'm not a math major, so 6 years now. And so it's appropriated by white liberals predominantly. I'm gonna help you. The killing of George
Floyd. 7 years. It's 2023.
Okay. Oh yeah, is it? Good heavens!
Somebody else does your taxes, right, Adam?
Well, that's another story. We've had our identity stolen before, and now somebody else has been claimed. Some people we have Social Security's numbers for and for fraudulent purposes, but let's not get into that. Now the term is used, and white liberals are just appalled by it because now conservatives are using it, and this is both. I like it, but at the same time, it's problematic. And the conservatives are using it to describe the far left.
Yeah.
Those who have it's largely a synonym with critical social justice theory today, but conservatives are using it as a pejorative, but it's becoming so widely used that it's almost like conservatives are using it to describe people they disagree with. So it's kind of like, what does it have any meaning anymore?
Yeah.
And I've been in some
it's really become
environments.
A term almost now, wouldn't you say? Like I hear progressives and liberals actually trying to distance themselves away from it. So, for example, conservatives love to accuse Meghan Markle of being like a symbol of wokeness with her shows and everything else. And yet I've seen stuff where Meghan Markle and others have said, well, no, we're not woke. Like they don't actually want to be even associated with the term now.
Yeah.
So I've also recently heard that a tactic for people trying to distance themselves, liberals trying to distance themselves from it, is just to say it has no meaning, right? Or that you don't know what it means. Thus,
I was going to say it's kind of a trap.
Yeah.
Because there's, as Adam said, one of the things that's kind of, I think, genius politically about a move like this is that the word has a meaning going back all the way to the 30s that is about, sort of, like you said,
keeping your eyes open
racial awareness.
If you're in danger.
If that gets then transferred to general progressive, like radical progressivism, and then conservatives start attacking it, all the progressives have to do is go, you're now attacking a black word and black people and black culture, and you've now stepped in the bear trap, right? Because it doesn't mean progressivism. It's about being aware, and so it's kind of a genius move.
I wouldn't call it a trap, though. I feel like that's more nefarious than what's happening, although I agree with overall what you're saying. But if someone believes in kind of a social justice theory of the world and of culture, so there's a guy named John McWhorter. He teaches at Columbia University. He writes for the New York Times. He's an atheist. He's African American. And he's written extensively about this because he's a linguist. And so his specialty is actually in Black vernacular. He has a book called Woke Racism, I think it is. Anyway, what he argues is that this social justice, wokeism, whatever you want to call it, is actually a religion. It meets all the sociological characteristics of religion. And therefore, what that means is it's not like a trap. It's literally that these people believe that every single thing should be run through this filter, and so they just see it everywhere. So anytime someone who disagrees with the religion says, well, no, I'm using, this is my other point of view, or I'm using the word in a different way. It's always a gotcha, haha, I told you so, because it's not a trap. It's just the way they see the world. They literally do believe that this systemic stuff is so systemic that it is everywhere.
I'm fearful of this show becoming way too political already. So, but let me just say that, I think that can be a both and, Bruce. Like, I think that there are people who legitimately, this is a religion, right? And they are filtering everything through that, and their reactions are honest and sincere. But the terminology changes so quickly that it's hard to deny that when one sort of tenet of their religion starts getting attacked, their willingness to change that tenet and be nimble enough to move and to start accusing other people of being unaware of its actual meaning, and therefore it has no meaning, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's a new word. And then everybody is supposed to catch up with that new word, and if you don't catch up, which I historically don't. I mean, I can tell you the first time I heard the word woke from Caleb and was like, what the heck does that mean? Right? So I historically don't catch up with the new words that I'm supposed to catch up with. And all of a sudden I look like, some sort of insensitive boob, who's not using the new terminology to keep up with things. And that kind of drives me a little bonkers, because I don't actually think of myself as that insensitive to some of these things. I just don't really keep up. I'm not super active on the sites on social media that would kind of let me into this. Even the sort of political shows I listen to on podcasts often are old people, so they get things like 3 weeks too late.
Boomer Town.
And it's
sorry to there are boomers who listen to the show. I'm not trying to be
so
rude.
There's some of that I think is a both and, though. And I do think one more thing. I do think there's like professional commentators who, it's much like what some of the people on Fox News are getting caught with right now, right? From the other direction, through the release of their emails in this lawsuit with the voting booth company, that they're not as sincere about their beliefs, and it really is sort of just like chasing what their audiences want to hear and sort of changing the terminology and trying to get gotcha stuff. But I do think, because I've met them, there are people for whom these are sincere beliefs. I disagree with them, but they are sincere worldview beliefs, and they're not trying to play games of gotcha. They're just sort of reacting as I would if somebody were attacking, say, Orthodox Christianity. And I understand that. I just don't think that's political.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I mean, I think we should always be cautious. I'm not saying you're not being, but I'm just to add to your conversation. We should always be cautious, because I hate when this happens, of judging a movement or a point of view based on the worst progenitors of that view. The fundamentalists, or the people who are the most uncharitable, or the people who appear the most insincere.
Oh, I agree. I don't want to be judged. I don't want to be judged as an LCMS Lutheran by the sort of, Caleb's going to get so upset with me about the crazy stuff that's happening on Twitter right now. With a few individuals, and then a few individuals comment. I don't want to be judged by that. I don't want people to connect. A Christianity Today post that describes what's going on within LCMS Lutheranism and have that connected to me. I don't. I think they're
a Rolling Stone article.
I think they're the worst progenitors of sort of my sort of little corner of the Lutheran faith. And they're the ones getting all the attention, and it's nuts.
Yeah. Here's the thing with woke, and I think we'd be well advised to try to keep this in the realm of it as a worldview, because there it is, kind of theological. Woke is no longer just about racial stuff. It's about now. I mean, it's almost interesting. I'm like you, Scott, where I just am not really connected to the social media world, all that. I mean, I throw up pictures without any context.
It is so annoying. It is so annoying.
But
I sometimes want to know, like, okay, what does that belt mean? I know it's something good. Like, I see one color belt on the shoulder and one color belt on the waist, and I'm not putting it together. So I either have to go do my own deep dive of jujitsu to figure out how this advancement is meaningful, or you could just tell me in a sentence in the post.
It just means, like, with you're talking about the picture of Kiana.
You do these all the time.
That little girl can get on your back and she'll choke you, and you can't get her off you. It's like, what the? Anyway, so here's the thing with the woke, though, is
he still thinks a 16-year-old.
From my little corner, which is a bigger corner than your corner because you're up in the mountains with the hillbillies. No offense. But it's almost like the focal point in this, if there is this woke movement, is now with the trans stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And who was it? I think it was Douglas Murray, who's a gay atheist, right? But observing all this stuff and can't stand it. He says what the woke movement is trying to do, even though it looks political, it's trying to replace the old metaphysic of the West. Kind of a theism, deism, something like that, or even a naturalism with this new metaphysic. With this new metaphysic that says there really is nothing that's really real. There's no objective foundation to things. Even, like, there's no biological foundation to things. You can just, whatever our lived experiences or our felt needs or whatever we feel like, that's what is reality. And that to me, if there is a thing called woke, and I think a lot of it's just a bunch of, a lot of this talk about it is just hot air, but I think there is this sort of movement, a worldview of movement that is very ideological, dogmatic in the way that a fundamentalist is dogmatic, that's working and has experienced some success, especially in universities. Well,
I agree, but I think it needs
schools.
a Council of Nicaea because it changes so much,
yes,
and so quickly.
Indeed,
like
indeed.
I do. I mean, I would love to respect it in a sense, and I would love to be able to sort of have a legitimate argument with it, but it's so evolutionary and it's so changing. Bruce, don't get mad at me. And it's so postmodern and it's destructive deconstructive qualities, that which means it's ever evolving, which means it's very difficult if you're sort of the person in the room who's just like had the same position for 50 years, to be able to address it or react to it or make an argument or even sympathize, because you never know quite what you're sympathizing with, because you kind of took a week to figure out if you could sympathize with the thing that was happening a week ago, and now it's been a week and there's a whole new thing that you got to sympathize with. Yeah. And that's and that's sort of, it needs a Council of Nicaea. If it's a religion, it needs a council.
Yeah, I think we can talk about some of its basic assumptions. Like, for example, I would say that a lot of the stuff that comes from the New Left, from the 60s, that's now manifesting itself in this sort of woke stuff, is the basic assumption of, like, it's a Rousseauian assumption.
Yeah.
That we're all free. Humankind in the Western world, in the United States, is free, but everywhere we're all in chains because there's all these institutions from the past that are systemically racist and discriminatory against non-binary, all these other things, and we need to deconstruct or transform those things and construct something new, a new social sort of.
And I think the reason
environment
you detect endless change is because it's always, that is the lens through which, like Bruce said, they see the world. So they see it everywhere. So the things that have been oppressed are potentially infinite, because all it takes is a handful of people coming out and saying, my, X, Y, and Z beliefs about myself and the world have been oppressed so much that I've never been able to speak up before, which is why we have things pop up that we never seemingly thought we had. And so now it can be infinite. Any particular thing or idea or behavior that was bad, not accepted, condemned by past laws or religions can arise. And so that list is just large.
I'd like to be able to like have that debate and say, that's a possibility. Like I'll give it. That's a possibility. But mass hysteria is also a possibility. Like once you sort of see a movement going, wanting to be part of that movement, wanting to have, be part of a movement, this is also a possibility. But the hardest thing for this is that one of the aspects of it that's most frustrating is that it's sort of, once it's quote unquote codified, and I never know how it becomes codified. The new thing becomes, I never understand how the new thing became codified, but once it's codified, it's no longer up for debate, and the part that's really frustrating is that if you do want to debate it, you're sort of minimized through name calling. Now, this happens on both sides, and it drives me bonkers. This happens sort of on Lutheran Twitter, and it drives me bonkers. Is that, if you sort of are now you're going off the side of whatever the new codified position on something is, and you want to sort of say, well, what about this? I thought that maybe this was the way we should go. If they disagree, if these sort of people using this sort of tactic disagree, the problem, even theologically, the problem is you're now an enemy, and you now need to go away. Shoo, go away. We can't hear from you anymore, and we're going to come up with all sorts of names for you that mean that you should be wholly disregarded. Now, the argument that said person might be making is rarely addressed. It's just a name, right? It's just all of a sudden you're titled, you're labeled something. Now, you could take this out of woke, right? When sort of, I'm going to do it, Caleb. I'm stepping into it. When sort of the third use sort of argument started coming up, a decade ago.
Oh, go for this one.
If you all of a sudden said, I actually think our historic position is this on the third use, and it didn't fall right in line with the new hotness on it.
You were an antinomian.
You were an antinomian, and then somebody came out and said, I'm not really an antinomian because historically antinomian means this. Blah, 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 blah. They say, okay, fine, you're a soft antinomian. And being a soft antinomian, you now need to be disregarded. And you're like, what? I actually never called you a name. I made an argument, and your response to that was name calling. This is the same tactic. This is the same sort of tactic that drives me crazy on sort of the political left, which has now made its way over to the political right, too. Again, Trump is famous for just name calling, right? His response to an argument made against him is to think of a kitschy name to call somebody. Now they're supposed to not be listened to anymore, right? And I don't care. I don't really love either one of these guys. But, Ron DeSantis was supposed to be dismissed because Trump all of a sudden came up with Ron DeSanctimonious.
That might be one of my favorite ones.
Okay, and it's like, whatever. So anybody that made an argument against sort of the new way of thinking about, and I'm calling it the new way of thinking about the third use. It's actually the new way, old way, but that's fine. It was being argued against, but that's okay. The new way of thinking about the third use of law was a soft antinomian. Okay, this does not make people wrong. Like if you come up with a name for them, if you call them a racist, or you call them Ron DeSanctimonious, or you call them a soft antinomian, it does not make them wrong. And this is the thing that drives me nuts about it. At the end of the day, I'm with Bruce. I appreciate sincerity and belief, even if I disagree with that belief. Right? So for people for whom this is a worldview, I may vehemently disagree with it, but I appreciate actual sincerity and belief. But I want to be able to make a case against it, and I think that what we've lost.
Everything you're advocating, and this is where you sound antiquated. Although I agree with you because I'm antiquated.
I am antiquated.
But
I take that as a compliment.
You're still working from the foundational assumption that the Enlightenment is in effect and that we can reason together.
Ding, 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 ding.
And we can't reason together anymore. That's the cultural diagnosis I would give. There's a little book I actually looked up.
I know that. I don't have to like it.
No, you don't have to like it.
Yeah.
There's this great little book by Carlos Stringer. It's a few years old now called, it's a great title, The Fear of Insignificance, Searching for Meaning in the 21st Century. And
You
I
just
think
called me insignificant, and I'm afraid of
no,
it.
I think this is actually this is the opposite of you.
I'm just kidding.
Is I think that's such an apt title. What is really driving the culture? Well, with the erosion of absolutes, people have a crisis of significance. And so the fear of insignificance, the fear of the self being seen as insignificant is driving a lot of, this is his thesis, driving a lot of the problems we have. He has this quote here, which I thought was really good. He says this: we can imagine ourselves as being very different from what we are. The result is that we feel that there is an inner self, the I, which is more essential to who we are than the accidental characteristics of birth and history, which have determined our actual fates. This imaginative creation of a self hidden from the outside world and untouched by the fate of the body is one of the paradigmatic strategies of what I will call the ontological protest of subjectivity. Just ignore that term. We can refuse to accept that we are who we ostensibly are by saying, I have the freedom and the power to shape myself and external reality according to my desire. The centrifugal strategy is exemplified by the cultural narratives of transformations such as rags to riches, wimp to sculpture of muscle, and misfit to famous artist. He's actually picking up on something here in the Enlightenment that just went too far, I think. What he's saying is this kind of rags to riches narratives that we were all taught. You can be anything that you want to be. You can achieve anything that you want to achieve. What did all that do? You're special. Good job. All this self-esteem movement, all the political correctness, it actually was all feeding into one thing, which is you are a special individual self, and that your real true self, who you truly are, authentically are, is hidden from the world and even from you. And you have to discover it, and then you have to promote it. You have to get it out there. So what you have all these people doing is creating selves that they're trying to find themselves.
That's not all they're doing. When somebody disagrees with them, they're destroying other selves.
Well, of course that's the flip side of it, right? That's the power dynamics, power struggle. Adam, do you think that woke is implicitly tied with a moral project? That's what I see. Maybe you have a different view on that.
I certainly do.
You studied it more than I have.
It does, but I think it's grounded. My concern with it is kind of doing it in a more academic-y way, I guess, is the assumptions it's grounded upon are just so radical. Mm-hmm. It's like this constructivism that reality really is, all of reality is a construct. There is no objective foundation to things. It's whoever has the loudest voice, whoever has the most power is going to win for a time. And then another movement will come and replace that. That is, I'm thinking, so Caleb, I don't know if your kids.
Absolutes is feeding it, you think?
Yeah, and I think there is a sort of smugness amidst those we might describe woke. I was, I don't want to get into specifics. I was kind of like at the end of in the sights of a kind of wokish kind of attack when I was accused of being a white supremacist by somebody who thought they were morally superior, because I don't even know why. It was just this. It was like, as Scott described, it was an attempt to cancel, and such that it even made its way into the Chicago Tribune. It was hilarious because it was a white guy attacking me. Meanwhile, at that point, it had been like a year and a half of on average 4 hours of sleep because I was caring for two little black kids, and it was comical. It's just so that's another thing about wokeness that really frustrates me, or if it's on the other side too, is just everything's in the world of abstractions. It's name calling. It's identifying systems of oppression and so on, but never particulars. It's never like, hey, there's my neighbor. I think a real antidote to all this stuff is kind of like a recovery of like a three estates, love for the neighbor in a real concrete way, not this abstract nonsense. And this is the problem with wokeism, really, I think, is, yes, it's a worldview, certainly parallels religion, but it's ultimately an ideology. And I think ideologies, whether they're right or left, are always problematic. And I think that's what's Scott's sensing, or what we're all sensing, is it's a belief that doesn't just have dogmas. Everybody has those, right? But it's a dogmatism that has no room for anything else, and attempts to destroy its enemies, real or perceived, to dominate.
And if you're not going to, and I think this is sort of the frustration of many who then sort of slip for the other, if you're not going to go on the attack, they're against or for, you are sort of left in this middle ground or this passive ground of watching the battle play out between the name callers, between the destroyers, between the cancelers. And I think the unfortunate part about that is...
I would say, too, there is... I know we might be wanting to do this as a distinct episode, but I'll just mention it now. There's a... My internet connection is unstable, so I don't know.
Oh, we can see you and hear you.
There's a biblical theme of being awake. Jesus told his disciples to be awake and be prepared for the last day. Essentially, Paul enjoins Christians to be awake, to live a life in pursuit of, in a horizontal sense, righteousness. So, in a way, it's almost like I saw a T-shirt somewhere, and maybe there's a book with the same title: "Awake but Not Woke." And so, like Christians looking at this woke movement, it can be. I've seen it even in my own extended family. This draw, because wokeism seems so religious and seems so moral and virtuous to some, because it's resisting or combating discrimination and so on. They think that they're actively pursuing a horizontal righteousness in getting involved in all these movements, but then they get sucked into the movements. Then the woke movement, in turn, is the lens through which they interpret Christianity. And that's the real problem here. Ideologies and worldviews always act as lenses, and they tend to impose themselves on concrete reality, whether it's
even
the data
if
of Scripture or...
Even if you're opposed and it becomes your filter for Christianity, then the prime mandate of your Christian faith becomes waging a intellectual crusade against this particular issue, rather than the maintenance of the church as that place where God delivers His word and His promise of forgiveness, and so I see that as the problem, right? Is that the call of the church into this action as the prime thing the church needs to do for the world right now is to fight this, and so that becomes tricky. I think, because, like you said, with there being three estates and then the distinct work of the church, you sort of have to separate that the distinct work of the church, even in an era where, fire is burning up against its walls, is to proclaim the gospel, not to wage a crusade.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough issue. I mean, we are living, whether we like it or not. And whether we should be involved in it or not is another question, but we are living in the midst of a culture war, I think. This kind of radical progressivism it's been around for some time, it just keeps getting increasingly radical. And I don't want to harp on this point. I don't want to make this the issue, but that now the trans stuff is like the burning social issue is just mind-boggling. But it is a kind of, I think it's a bit of a symptom of just how, or a sign of just how perverse the assumptions about the nature of reality are in this, what we might call the woke movement.
What I'm trying to still figure out with all of this is, and this I'm summarizing, I guess, here, which always can create a problem. But what I see as a cultural ethic, whether someone's woke or not, but a general cultural ethic, at least in America or North America, is the sort of idea of freedom and justice for all. However you want to define that, though, becomes the debate. But it's this idea of like people should have as much freedom and they should be recipients of justice. You know, it's been enshrined in our sayings for a long time. And then the debate is over how to do that. But what I am confused about is, I agree with you, Adam, like there's this loss of absolutes. But in another way, there's actually been a heightening of absolutes, but in the wrong place, maybe. So what I mean by that is there's no cosmic or universal absolutes, sort of. But what there is now is there's the absolute of intolerance. You absolutely can't tolerate certain things. So it's not that there's no absolutes at all.
No, they've just changed dramatically, and they change quickly. And
it's actually more
you got to stay on your toes
than in the Enlightenment, because the reason functioned in the Enlightenment to sort of be a check and balance on absolutes, because it could interrogate those absolutes, and it could say, well, there's a space where we can come together and interrogate. This is, I think, where Scott was going, you know, and we can interrogate those. And with that space missing, all you're sort of left with actually is differing absolutes and no place to adjudicate them. So might becomes right. And it really is just a power struggle. And then the problem is that you get hierarchies of victim and oppressor and all these other binaries, because people have no other way that they know how to get freedom and justice for all. So what we've really lost, I think, is a place, I'll call it a secular space, because I think that is what it was. A secular place, while albeit not completely neutral, at least had the trappings of equality. People could come with their reason and they could debate something out. If that's gone now and it just becomes, well, this is what I think justice is, and it's a moral project, and everybody has different views on morals, where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us in a very scary place, I think.
Yeah, it's
as a culture. It's a culture.
And confusing and scary, and you know, any progress that we thought we made away from might makes right, we seem to be back to.
Mm-hmm. And for a classical libertarian like you, Scott,
oh man, I struggle with it.
Those, I mean, myself too. You know, I mean,
yeah,
it's just you just sit back and you think, what?
I struggle with it.
And let me just one other thing is, if you know the place where that was supposed to be a kind of, relatively speaking, neutral space to debate things on their own merit were the universities.
Yep.
And that's gone.
Yeah.
Not 100%, but I would say in the high 90s.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's been the place that has been, you know, the flashpoint for eliminating debate in a lot of ways. So the elimination of debate has moved its way from the university to society. And so that place where debate was supposed to happen was the first place where it stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And more people now go to university than ever in the history of the world before, so they're getting inculcated by these different, you know, ideologies.
Yeah, we should do because I know Bruce has read this book, and I know Adam's read the book, and I made Caleb read the book. So we should do something on the idea of the university.
That'd be really good.
Newman's?
Yeah. I wrote
I did.
What were those called? Showcases at Concordia? I did a showcase on that.
On the idea of the university?
Yeah, on Newman, yeah. But that'd be interesting. That's a good book to do. Yeah, that's a good transition.
I feel like everything would be better if everybody just settled their differences on the mat. You know, that's the way I feel about it.
Back to my mates, right? All right, and welcome. Thank you for listening to the Thinking Fellows podcast.
No, I'm trying to, you know, like, unfortunately, it's I don't know. I hate depressing endings to shows because the answer, well, there's not a lot of answer, but the thing that this ends on is that you kind of got to watch it unfold. And that it's
what it should end on is the hope of the world is Jesus Christ, because we're not gonna fix our own problems, because look, we can't do it. We're not capable.
What it should end on is that the hope for the Christian is connected to Jesus Christ and the salvation that He's won for us, and the fact that He will come again to take us home, and that part of the Christian life is sort of enduring these things that sometimes will be frustrated for us as we await the coming of our Lord and Savior. And that these things that happen in society and culture.
Right. Amen.
Amen.
Well, hopefully that was a good close. Thank you for listening to the Thinking Fellows podcast, part of the 1517 podcast network of shows. You can go to 1517.org/podcast to see all of our shows there. And if you're a newer listener to the Thinking Fellows, you can subscribe for free in your favorite podcasting apps, and you can go through our backlog of over 7 years of shows now, which I was like, that's a long time.
That's a long time
to do. So there are 7 years of episodes to go back and look at. So and if you are enjoying the show, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We thank you for listening. Catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.